Hi, this is Caro Kilfeather from Percussion Software, and I'm here with Alicia Hale of Emagine. She's the Vice President of Digital Marketing Services, and you might know her from a recent webinar hosted by the American Marketing Association talking about which web metrics should really matter most to marketers. So it was a tremendous webinar. Alicia, you did a great job. And we got loads and loads of questions, and unfortunately didn't have time to answer them all during the webinar, so we've decided to put together this quick call to get more of your questions answered. So let's just dive right in. Alicia, this first question came up a lot, and based on the poll that we gave to the attendees, there were a lot of people who didn't feel very comfortable with Google Analytics. So for the true beginner, how do you get started with Google Analytics? And, does it cost anything? Are there different service levels? What do people need to know?
Well, the wonderful thing about Google Analytics is it is 100% free. So there is no fee to use Google Analytics. What I tend to recommend for novices, if there are people out there who are relatively unfamiliar with Google Analytics and are just starting to dive in, I recommend that you utilize some of the resources that Google has provided to us for free. There are a plethora of different tutorials and walkthroughs about the different aspects of Google Analytics provided to us free of charge, once again, by Google, that can be used to get everybody up to speed. Also, a new thing that just was released, some new news from Google, is that the Google Analytics certification is now free for Google partners. So if your company is a Google partner, you can now take the Google Analytics certification test for free and become Google Analytics certified as well. I mention that even though it might seem like a more advanced thing to do, because by studying for the test, you can use the knowledge that you learn to become certified and to become more of an expert within Google Analytics as well. But aside from all of the documentation and the tutorials, you can never learn as much about Google Analytics as you can when you actually go in there, mess around, play a little bit with it. As long as you have a website that you're able to add Google Analytics code to, you can set up your account for free. Go in there, dive in, mess around, familiarize yourself, and try by doing. That is my biggest recommendation to get more comfortable with Google Analytics.
Great, thank you. And I should add that your content management system, whatever it might be, should make it really easy for you to add that Google Analytics code. It's really just dropping it in and it works. All right, so we have another fairly basic but very important question. What's the difference between a session and a page view as they're tracked in Google Analytics?
We have to love how Google sometimes can change its terminology to make things a little bit more confusing than they need to be. For those of us who've used Google Analytics for years now, sessions used to be referred to as visits in the back end of Google Analytics, and although the terminology has changed, what it represents is still the same. So a session is a visit to a website. A page view is how many pages have been viewed on that website. So, for example, you may have per month around 2,000 visits or sessions to your website, but you may have 6,000 page views. That means, on average, people are viewing around 3 pages per visit or session to your website. So sessions are visits, page views are the number of pages that are viewed in total by all of those people who are visiting your website during their sessions.
Great. So another question that was pretty popular was, we talked about bounce rates, what they are, and generally you want to keep it low, but some people in B2B were wondering, is a high bounce rate, always a bad thing, especially if you have a very specific audience that you're trying to reach?
Yes, I once again am an SEO by trade. I mentioned that during our webinar a few days ago that you can watch again on a link on either the Percussion blog or the Emagine blog. And for me, a bounce rate is always bad. Horrible, horrific. You do not want a high bounce rate, a bounce rate over 40 or 50%. You want to try and keep it low, because what some people don't realize is that Google takes bounce rate into account when they're trying to come up with your site's domain authority. So your rankings can be affected by a very high bounce rate. That said, if you are running any sort of digital advertising campaign, and when I say digital advertising, I mean Google AdWords, Bing Ad Center, anything through Facebook ads or Twitter ads or LinkedIn sponsored posts, if you're running any sort of paid digital advertising, you will tend to see higher bounce rates on average from that traffic that can influence your site's overall bounce rate. That said, I still would like to see a relatively low bounce rate for a site in total. So if you are seeing higher bounce rates that are influenced by your digital advertising, I would urge you to try and refine your digital advertising campaigns a little bit better so that you're driving more targeted traffic to your site that's not bouncing, and also ensure that the traffic you're driving via those digital advertising campaigns are going to landing pages that are no index, no followed. And what I mean by that is you can set specific code on a landing page, or you can specify in your CMS whether or not you want that page to be not indexed by search engines, so that the traffic that is being driven to a particular landing page only comes from paid advertising campaigns and does not influence your domain authority in the eyes of Google. That may be a little bit confusing. I'm sure that we can probably explain it in greater detail in the blog post that will accompany this Google chat. But overall, to answer the original question, to me, a high bounce rate is always a bad thing, no matter how targeted your site is.
Okay, so I think that's a great segue into our next question, which if you're running advertising campaigns on Google, you're probably paying a lot of attention to keywords and hoping to get some useful feedback from Google Analytics there. And in recent months, those are getting harder and harder to come by. And probably if you've seen Google keyword traffic in Google Analytics, you're getting a lot of not provided ones. So what would you say is your advice for dealing with all those not provided keywords and how to still get good information about your visitors without them?
Oh, such a sad day for all of us marketers and all of us in the SEO world. The move to secure search was not good for us. We used to get such great keyword traffic in our analytics accounts that allowed us to be able to see what keywords we've optimized for, if you are running some sort of SEO on your site, which keywords were actually driving traffic and driving conversions. Now, unfortunately, although I'm still grieving over the loss of that data, there are different places we can look in analytics to be able to provide us with information that allows us to see how well our keywords or the pages that we've optimized are performing. So there are two main places that I look to be able to gauge effectiveness of an SEO strategy based on keywords that were used and optimization that was performed. One of them is the page view section, and most specifically within the page view section of analytics, the landing page or entrance page view. And I also look at the queries view in analytics or in Google Webmaster Tools. You can see that queries view in the search engine optimization section of analytics if you have linked your Webmaster Tools account to your analytics account. If you haven't, you can see queries mainly in your Webmaster Tools account. So the reason I look at both of these two areas is that if you are optimizing a website or you are working with an SEO agency to optimize a website, chances are that agency is tracking all URLs that have been optimized along with the specific terms that they have been optimized for. Any good SEO agency should be doing that for you. We do that here at Emagine. So we can tell when we log into an analytics account and we look at the landing pages, if the pages that we have optimized are driving organic traffic to a website, and if those pages that we've optimized are continuing to grow in their organic traffic visits over time. So that's one barometer that we take a look at to see if our keywords that we have optimized the site for are working to generate traffic, because it is about the organic traffic in any sort of search engine optimization that you perform.
Right.
And also, just to touch on the query section as well, queries is still relatively unreliable, and I am a skeptic because of the nature of what I do about all data, all metrics, even data and metrics populated in Google Analytics. But the queries section of either Google Analytics or Google Webmaster Tools provides us with queries or keywords that are typed into search engines that allow us to see trends. which the keywords that are featured in that report can give us some idea of what your site in general is found to be relevant for from a keyword perspective. That queries report also provides us with several other metrics like click-through rate or click-through percentage as well. But those metrics are the ones I'm a little bit more skeptical about. So if I were you and I were trying to gauge the effectiveness of any sort of keyword strategy I've implemented, I would look at the queries report to try and get a sense of your overall relevance for certain terms. And I would also look at the page views, the landing page views report, to be able to see if the pages you've optimized are actually working for you to drive traffic to your website.
Great, great. So another thing that came up from multiple attendees in the webinar is they were wondering whether you thought it was more beneficial to track the overall number of visitors or users of your website, or whether it was more important to focus on new users specifically.
You know, I think it really depends on your sales cycle, and I tend to check both in general. Because I think it's good to be able to get a good idea of overall visit numbers and also unique visit numbers. And I alluded to this a little bit in the webinar as well. If you tend to have a longer sales cycle, then returning visitors are going to be very important to you because, man, they take a while to make a decision. And we see that in the B2B world all the time. Sales cycles tend to be very, very long. So if you're in the B2B world, I would take a pretty hard look at returning visits. But if you have a relatively short sales cycle, like most B2Cs do, then you would be pretty interested in just overall traffic and unique visits as well. But in general, I look at both. I like to look at all overview stats like new visits, unique visits, returning visits, bounce rate, page views, everything to be able to get an overall picture of how a website is performing in general.
Okay. Great. So next few questions, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We got a lot of great questions about referral traffic in particular and separating email traffic away from other types.
Yes.
So,
one of your specialties, Cara, at Percussion.
We talked about tagging links with information about source and the campaign that they were attached to. So a lot of folks were wondering if a link is embedded in an email, but it's not tagged in any way. Is it going to show up as a referral link in Google Analytics, or is it going to show up as an email sourced link?
It's hard to tell. We've been told in general that it can show up as referral. It can show up as direct. I've read articles from thought leaders that mention a whole bunch of different options for how traffic from email can show up within Google Analytics. So what I would recommend to be able to get clarity on whether email that is being, or whether visits that are being logged in your analytics campaign are coming from email, is to use the Google URL builder, which I'm sure we'll provide the link to within the blog post that will accompany this chat that we're doing right now. That said, I would only think that you would need to use the Google URL Builder if you're not using any sort of marketing automation system. Marketing automation systems like Marketo, like Acton, like HubSpot, like Pardot, all put in some sort of email encoding inherently. So if you are using sort of a marketing automation system, you're set. You don't have to do anything else. It automatically, that traffic automatically goes into your analytics account by email and is all automatically placed both in the email section of your traffic breakdown and within the campaign section of your analytics account as well. But if you're not using one of those marketing automation systems that I just mentioned, the only way to clearly clarify that the traffic that your site is receiving is coming from email is to use that Google URL builder for your links that you feature in an email. If you don't use it, that traffic could go anywhere based on if people are using a desktop installation of Outlook, or if they're using the email client, or if they're using something else, if they're accessing email via a cell phone. It could be registered as direct. It could be registered as referral. There is debate, so much debate on it. I would venture to guess that most people don't really know where that traffic is coming from if you're not using the Google URL builder for your email marketing.
Sure. So we had some of our attendees during the webinar say they use everything from MailChimp, which on the very low tier is completely free, to things like Marketo, Pardot, Eloqua. kind of running the full gamut of sizes. Would you say it really matters what system they use for email and marketing automation, or are they pretty well equipped to tag your links this way?
If you use any sort of marketing automation system, including the ones you mentioned, even a Constant Contact, those are all encoding your links in this way right out of the box. So they all should be encoding your links that way right out of the box. So from a tracking perspective, to me, any of those marketing automation systems we just discussed will provide you with the tracking that you need. But of course, the higher end you go, the more intelligence you get within your own specific installation of your marketing automation system. Aside from Google Analytics, opens and spam rates are all available there, but are not available via Google Analytics.
Right.
So from an analytics perspective, any of those marketing automation systems work for tracking.
So what about Bitly and similar link shortening services? How are those tracked?
Those are tracked depending on where you share them. So I get this question pretty frequently, and what I can say in general is any link shortener is not going to obstruct the source of your visit. So say you are sharing, you've written a blog post and you have loaded that blog post into the Google URL builder. You're about to share it on LinkedIn, but you don't want to share an obscenely long URL, which unfortunately the Google URL builder tends to spit out by nature, so we can get all that tracking. To be able to shorten things, you can pop that Google URL builder into a Bitly style link shortener. Google has a good link shortener. HubSpot has a good link shortener. You can dump that long URL into any sort of link shortener and then share it on LinkedIn. And that traffic will still be populated as traffic from LinkedIn in the referral sources section of your account. So all I can say in general is that any sort of link shortener does not obstruct the general source of the traffic to your website.
Okay, so you won't lose information that you've added, but it won't necessarily inherently add more information.
Exactly. So feel free to use them. I love link shorteners. I know you do too, Caro.
I do.
Feel free to use them to make the usability of your shares a little bit better for your users.
One item that came up when we're looking at referral traffic is one that's clearly causing problems for some of the folks who attended, and that was the semalt.semalt referrals. People were asking about how you disable it, how do you keep it from skewing your data.
Yes.
What is it?
It is an analytics, it's trying to be an analytics platform that wants to rival Google Analytics. A paid version of Google Analytics, I think, in the future is what it wants to be when it grows up. But right now, to be able to get that sort of data that we inherently get from Google Analytics, it needs to be able to crawl websites on the internet and grab metrics from those websites, grab data from those websites to put in its repository so that when people track sites, they can see that data. So I wouldn't call it malicious. I don't think that the site is malicious. I think it's just driven to try and take some of that market share from Google Analytics. Sure. That said, it really does mess up our referral traffic numbers. That is for sure, because if you have found your way onto Semalt's seed list, which is what they call it, you will be pinged repeatedly so that they are allowed to build up the amount of information they have on your website in their systems. The nice thing about Semalt, and they were probably backed into a corner to do this based on complaints, is that they have provided us with the opportunity to request removal from being crawled by their crawler.
So how can somebody do that?
I have provided you guys with a link within the blog post that will accompany this chat, but it is located at semalt.com/project_crawler.php. And when you visit that page, you'll get even more of an overview on what Semalt is and what Semalt does. But it allows you to enter your URL in a box, hit submit, and you will be removed from Semalt's seed list in, they say, 30 minutes after you hit that submit button. But I would ask everybody to keep in mind that when you're asking for removal, you're only asking for removal from the specific URL that you enter into that box. So if you have a subdomain on your site, meaning if, for example, you have some sort of a Marketo installation and it's located at go.com Emagine.com as an example, and you've only requested that www.emagine.com has been should be removed, you may still see SEMalt in your referral traffic because it can still crawl the go.emagine.com. So any main URL or subdomain that you currently feature on your website, you should request removal of via SEMalt. It's a quick and painless process, so I encourage anybody who's seeing their referral traffic skewed by this site to hop in, paste your URL in there, hit submit, and go on with the rest of your day.
Great, and thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So let's talk about conversions a little bit, which
Yes.
obviously are very, very important to marketers who are concerned about ROI. For some of them, the typical measures are not the right fit. So for somebody that needs to track something other than downloads or signups or actual sales, if your site is not necessarily sales focused,
Yes.
what can you track as a conversion?
That's a great question, and one I deal with every day, because in the B2B world, we don't really deal with too many clients who are really pushing sales really hard. More often than not, our clients push assets. They push white papers, they push data sheets, they push a variety of different assets, and a lot of those assets are gated. So basically, to me, a conversion can be described as anything that can either populate your list or gives you more info on how your website is being used beyond what is available standard out of the box within Google Analytics. So if you are gating content, and when I say gating, I mean form protecting content with a form, hopefully with as few fields as possible. That would, to me, once that form is completed and a thank you page is hit, that would be a conversion to me, because you have given yourself, or your visitor has given you valuable content that can be added to your database and can enter your sales funnel. The other side of the coin is gauging usability. So if you are enacting a funnel within your homepage that you want people to follow to dive into the deeper layers of your website, as I talked about in the webinar, and you want to see if that funnel is being followed in greater detail, you can add something to your site called event tracking. It used to be called on-click tracking, and you can add that to the main calls to action on your site to see if that funnel has been followed as well. I mentioned that in the conversion tracking discussion because the results of that on-click tracking are located in that goals section in analytics as well, which is the same place you would go to be able to see how many conversions your site is getting from a form completion. But to me, I mentioned that too because if somebody is doing what you want them to do, what you hoped that they would do based on the design and the architecture of your site, to me that's a conversion as well, because it's providing you with intelligence, and that person is completing the goal that you had wanted them to complete based on the funnel that you enacted. So if you're not driving sales, if you aren't selling iPhones, giving away iPhones, which is an example I use all the time because in our industry, man, is that far-fetched. Gated assets, to me, a download there is a conversion, and any sort of on-click tracking that you might want to add that's followed can be talked about in that conversion perspective as well.
Thank you. So I say best question for last, and it's probably a burning question for a lot of folks who are trying to put together a budget for SEO right now, which, as we know, it can get expensive.
Yes.
When it comes to seeing a real boost in your organic traffic, who gets all the credit for these kinds of increases? Should the SEO firm that you hire get all the credit for organic traffic increases?
I will take all the credit if any of my clients want to give it to me. No, I'm kidding. The only way to have SEO success is to have a partnership with your SEO firm. Your SEO firm is a consultant. Is your consultant about primarily. They guide you. They should be doing your keyword research. They should be kind of telling you where those keywords should go and what the best practices to optimize a site are. But when it comes down to it, your content is your content. Your brand is your brand. And being able to utilize those best practices and that your SEO firm might recommend while furthering writing really engaging content that furthers the visibility of your brand and pushes people to want to share that content, that's the name of the game. So you really do need to have both sides working. And Caro and I talked about this a little bit before we got on the video chat today. Percussion Software is just a perfect example of a client that works with us, me,
Thank you.
our SEO firm, as it should be done. We give direction. Caro in particular writes absolutely stellar content utilizing the best practices that we recommend and the keywords that we've chosen to drive traffic to the website. And through that partnership, we have garnered some huge SEO success continually over the last year. So I would say that any SEO firm that tries to take full credit of for any sort of search engine optimization success is not doing the client justice. And in a good SEO partnership, which is what it really should be if you're working with an SEO firm, I'd say it's more 50-50. The SEO firm should take some of the credit, but the client and the content creator should be taking some of that credit as well.
That's great. So unfortunately, you're not off the hook, marketers. You still have to do some work to make it work.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Alicia. You did a great job on the webinar, and hopefully these answers will help everyone figure out what they want to do next with Google Analytics, dive in a little bit deeper, feel more confident with it. We have included links in the blog post to some of the templates that everyone asked for, specifically traffic by day of the week and time of day. We do have a link to the SEMalt crawler, so you can remove any websites that you don't want on that list, as well as a link to our blog post about Google's URL builder. And of course, if you have any other questions, you can leave them in the comments of this post or tweet at us at Percussion or at Emagine at Emagine USA. We'll be more than happy to answer, and let us know if there's anything else that's in your mind. Again, thank you very much for your time, Alicia.
Absolutely. Happy to help. And as Caro said, any additional questions, they will get to us one way or another if you choose to throw them to us via Twitter or via the comments beneath this post.